Okay, a good vach and a good chodesh. It's customary, actually, to say good chodesh, even though we're already deep in the month already. Whenever you do Kiddush Havana, you say good vach and you say good chodesh. So you got a good week and a good month. So I want to share tonight a few stories about the power of learning the daily regimen of Chumash, Tehillim, and Tanya. Yosef Masud was sharing with us today about how he was in a car accident at Chol Islam. He was driving his scooter, and but he was learning Tanya while he was driving his scooter, and he felt that because he was learning Tanya, Baruch Hashem, though he flew in the air and he got hurt a bit, but thank God nothing happened to him. He's fine, 100%. And there was actually someone who he asked the Rebbe for a blessing to be connected to the Rebbe. The Rebbe said to him, you should say Tanya when you walk on the street, because the Rebbe said, I also say Tanya when I walk on the street, automatically we'll meet together. It is customary not only to say stories of tzaddikim in general on Motzei Shabbos, but specifically about the Baal Shem Tov, as Rebbe told Rabbi Moshe Levin, that in every circumstance, you should always say a story of a tzaddik on Motzei Shabbos, and whether you're with one person or two people, always share a story. So tonight, I actually have a story of the Baal Shem Tov, which I'm going to share. The story goes like this. It's known that the Tzemach Tzedek was fighting a war against the Haskalah movement, and he was arrested many times because of his involvement in this effort. There's an interesting exchange that Bezalel Stern, who was one of the representatives that the government wanted to have at the meeting with the Tzemach Tzedek and the other various tzaddikim. There was Rabbi Volozhiner represented the Lithuanian Misnagdish Yeshiva Shechem. Tzemach Tzedek, who had, as a previous Rebbe wrote, had about 600,000 chassidim. He represented the chassidim, and they had a representative of the Haskalah movement, Dr. Lilienthal, and Bezalel Stern represented the business class at the time, the upper class of the Jewish people. So Tzemach Tzedek was arrested many, many times in his efforts to help the Jewish people. It's a fascinating exchange that Mr. Bezalel Stern had with Chassidim in one interval. The Tzemach Tzedek was accused by Dr. Lilienthal of the Haskalah movement of the following. The Haskalah movement sent many representatives to various cities, strongholds of both the Hasidic movement and the strongholds of the Yeshivish, Litvish Yidden, and their goal was to try to get these Jews, these very religious people, to discourage them from being so religious and to join the Haskalah movement. They had various different methods that they used. They would pretend to be very pious individuals, and they would dress in different ways, and try to seduce people to join the Haskalah movement. One of the things they would do was to try to teach grammar. They taught Hebrew grammar. The goal of teaching Hebrew grammar was to get in the conversation and to bring children to go, or adults to go to learn in Germany in yeshivas. But those yeshivas really weren't yeshivas. They were actually Haskalah. The Haskalah set up these boys who came to Berlin to learn Hebrew grammar or the finer wisdoms of the world to bring back into the tents of Torah. They discouraged them from keeping Judaism, and many of them left Judaism as a result of the efforts of the Haskalah movement. They were called the Berlinchikes. Berlinchikes, those who went from Vilna and other cities to Berlin, and they brought up very religiously, but they became assimilated through their trips to universities and the schools of the Haskalah movement in Berlin. And they left Yiddishkeit, unfortunately, as a result of this. So that Tzemach Tzedek was very strong about this, and on many occasions, the Tzemach Tzedek actually, when the Chassidim would discover a representative of the Haskalah movement, they would eject him from the town with bizyonis. He would be disgraced. He would, as he was a spy, he was trying to infiltrate, and the kind of way that they were treated when they were discovered was something that irked the ire of Dr. Lilienthal, who was the leader of the Haskalah movement at the time. So he told at this meeting with the representatives of the Russian government, together with Tzal Stern and Mishav Lozhner, he said that the Tzemach Tzedek is actually guilty of treason, because all representatives of the Haskalah movement were sanctioned by the Russian government, and therefore not actually representing just the Russian government, the Haskalah movement, the representatives of the Russian government, and therefore by the Hasidim disrespecting them, they're disrespecting the Russian government, and therefore the Tzemach Tzedek, who encourages Hasidim to act this way, deserves capital punishment because he's committing acts of treason. So Tzemach Tzedek responded, I'm not quoting the exact words, but more important is the way he responded. He responded very coolly and very clearly that what I am doing is something that my forefathers have done, and that is to uphold the laws of Torah and Yiddishkeit. And if I need to die for the purpose of spreading Torah and Judaism, I'm ready to die as well. And that's what Tzemach Tzedek said, and it made quite an impression on everyone. So this Bezalel Stern, I mentioned before, when he left the meeting, he met the Hasidim. They wanted to hear what had happened, and he told them what the Tzemach Tzedek had said and how impressed he was. And he said, the reason I was impressed was because I noticed the difference between the Tzemach Tzedek, your Rebbe, and another Jew whose name was Shlomo Shtadlin. Shlomo Shtadlin was someone who acted as sort of like a lawyer representing Jews in the various courts of the Polish princes and noblemen. When a Jew would get in trouble with the Polish prince or nobleman, they would call on this Jew, a well-to-do Jew who had dealings because of his business with the various the nobles of Poland and of Russia, and they sent Shlomo Shtadlin to represent them. So when Shlomo Shtadlin would have to beseech a king or a prince or a duke on behalf of a Jew, Shlomo Shtadlin would take with him his burial shrouds. This is what Tzal Stern is telling the Hasidim. He says he took with him his burial shrouds, but he left his sacrifice at home. He left his Mesiras Nefesh at home. He may be, in other words, he's ready to die, but it wasn't, Tzal Stern felt he left his sacrifice at home. On the other hand, he says, your Rebbe, Tzemach Tzedek, it may be that he left his burial shrouds at home, but he took his Mesiras Nefesh with him, took his dedication with him. In other words, you could be dedicated to something to the point of giving your life for it. That's different than being ready to die. Tzemach Tzedek left the burial shrouds at home. We're talking about, vis-a-vis what kind of, what's going to happen afterwards in case I get in trouble. Shlomo Shtadlin was ready to die, that's true. But the Tzemach Tzedek's dedication was more like, this is going to happen, we're going to win. So the Tzemach Tzedek, before visiting Petersburg on one of his missions on behalf of the Jewish people, he visited the ohel of his mother, Rabbi and who had passed away long before when the Tzemach Tzedek was still a child. So the Tzemach Tzedek told this exchange he had with his mother after she passed away to his son, the Rebbe Marash, who also had to visit various echelons of the government on behalf of the Jewish people, also because of the Haskalah movement. And the Tzemach Tzedek told the Rebbe Marash the following: my mother told me that because of my visit that I had to have with the Haskalah movement, with the Russian government, my mother said that she went into the chamber of the Baal Shem Tov. I went into the Baal Shem Tov to ask on your behalf on Baal Shem Tov. So Baal Shem Tov told me, said Rebbe Tzedvor Aleya to the Tzemach Tzedek in a vision that he had of her after her passing in a dream. He said that my mother told me that the Baal Shem Tov said, it says in the Torah, Chitas alakim ala orim ha'el. There will be the fear on the cities, the fear of Hashem on these cities. That's what the verse says. But the verse in Bereshis. be the fear of Hashem on these cities. So the Baal Shem Tov said that the word Chitas is also an acronym for the words of three books, the book of Chumash, the book of Tehillim, the book of Tanya. And since, said the Baal Shem Tov says, that your son, Tzemach Tzedek, he knows all of these three books by heart. He knows the Chumash by heart, the Tehillim by heart, and the Tanya by heart. So therefore, he'll be protected. Chitas Elokim will be protected in his mission in the on behalf of the Jewish people. That's what his mother said. So the Tzemach Tzedek told this to Rabbi Marash, and he said to him that wherever you go in Petersburg, you should, whether you're in a government office or you're visiting a minister, you should recite 3 chapters of Chumash, 3 chapters of Tehillim and Tanya. And the Rabbi Marash told this story, how this instruction he got from his father, and he told this to the Rebbe Rasham, and he said that, what do you suppose happens with this? This was a very good prescription, he said. With 3 chapters of Chumash, 3 chapters of Tehillim, 3 chapters of Tanya, he said all the plots of the Maskilim, of the Haskalah movement, was nullified, and the Jewish people who hold steadfast and true to Torah and its holiness were amazingly victorious. And he said that the leader of the Maskilim, leader of the Haskalah movement, escaped the country out of fear and humiliation as a result of the great financial loss that they caused the government due to the unsold books that they published. The Haskalah movement was in trouble, the Russian government, because they had gotten the government involved in printing their books, and the government had invested in it, supposing that the books would be sold, and now the leader of the Haskalah movement had to leave as a result of the fact that the books were not sold. This is, by the way, a lot of what I'm sharing tonight comes from the Deher magazine of this month. There is another part which is not in this Deher magazine, another story which I may have shared before, I don't recall. There was there is in England a teacher, a mechanech, named Aaron Dandarovich. Aaron Dandarovich's father passed away several years ago. And at the Shiva, during the Shiva for his father, he was visited by a friend of his father's. He told his son the following story. He said that, Aaron, the Rabbi Nandarovich knows about the story before he met this friend of his father's, Rabbi Rozhdinsky. All that he knew about the story was that he was 5 years old, his father was sick. They didn't know anything more than that. But now by his father's funeral, he discovered how his father recovered. What happened was that Rabbi Rozhdinsky and Aaron Dandarovich's father, they were together, they grew up together, and they also were in the concentration camps together. And they really had a bond of soul to soul. So when they were living in England, in London, after the war, Rabbi Aaron's father got very sick. And the doctors wanted to do a operation on his brain. It's a very dangerous operation. The doctors said the operation is very dangerous, and there's a chance that we'll be able to heal you. And on the other hand, there's a likelihood that you'll become a vegetable. So they didn't know what to do. They didn't know if they should operate or not. So Rabbi Aaron's father sent a letter to 23 rabbis around the world, asking them what he should do. Now, none of the rabbis he had asked answered him at all. They didn't say anything. How would they know what we're supposed to do? And they didn't answer at all. And there was also, Rabbi Aaron said, you have to understand, after World War II, the world was everyone was so dejected and despondent because of the colossal loss of the Jewish people. So it wasn't surprising no one answered. The only one who answered, he said, was the Rebbe. And the Rebbe responded, and the Rebbe said that this man, Aaron's father, should study Chumash, Tehillim, and Tanya. But he was so sick at the time, it wasn't possible that he should study Chumash, Tehillim, and Tanya. So Rabbi Yisrael called the Rebbe's office, and he said, what does Rebbe mean? He's not able to do this. So I think he was talking to Rabbi Chadakov, the Rebbe's secretary, and Rabbi Chadakov laid this to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said it's sufficient for one of the members of the family also to study Chitas, which wasn't possible either. Rabbi Aaron was 5 years old, so Rabbi Yisrael said no one in the family could do it. So the Rebbe said it's also sufficient if a family member does it on his behalf. If a friend does it on his behalf. So Yisrael Brzezinski told Rabbi Aaron, he said, for 40 years, I'm studying Chitas every single day in merit of your father, and your father recovered miraculously without an operation then, and he lived for 40 years despite the fact that the doctor said that he had this incurable illness. So Chitas doesn't have just a protection for ourselves who do it, it also has protection for somebody who do it in their merit, and far beyond that. And it's not something that doesn't have a personal immediate effect. The Arizal famously was able to tell in a person's face whether they did a mitzvah or not do a mitzvah that day. And similarly, many people asked the Rebbe for various blessings, and the Rebbe responded to them with one word, Chitas, ? My uncle, Rabbi Chaim Fogelman al told me how he wrote to the Rebbe several times, on several occasions, for many different things. And if that was a time when he was not studying Chitas, he got an immediate response from the Rebbe, Chitas, underline, ? And time passed, wrote again, Chitas, underline, ? Rabbi Aaron Dalfin from Florida, he had an issue he wanted the Rebbe's advice about, and the Rebbe responded to him with one word, Chitas. So he interpreted the Rebbe's statement was more about him not being such a devoted chassid. He didn't take it literally, he has to focus on Chitas. So he just thought, like, okay, the Rebbe is telling me I'm not such a chassid, I have to be a better chassid. Okay, that's nice, or that's not so nice. But he didn't actually start learning Chitas. But he didn't get an answer to his questions. So he wrote to the Rebbe again, months later, and he asked Rebbe again, what should he do? Rebbe responded again, Chitas. So he took this seriously, started learning Chitas. And then after I started to learn Chitas, he wrote to the Rebbe again, and the Rebbe answered all of his questions. There is a story of a man talking to the Rebbe once, asking for the Rebbe's advice, and the Rebbe asked him if he was learning Chitas, and he said no, and the Rebbe said, you're not learning Chitas. Here I am giving time from my yechida, from the essence of my soul, for your yechida, the essence of your soul, and you're not even learning Chitas. In other words, that's like a prerequisite. There was a Jew named Rabbi Yaakov Stamler who lost a lot of money because an investment went sour. He wrote to the Rebbe about the investment and how it went sour. The Rebbe responded to him, did you learn Chitas that day? So it shows that the Chitas we learn has an effect not only in general on our whole life, but also on that specific day. If you miss Chitas during the day, the Rebbe once said you can finish Chitas just like the sacrifices which were brought by day were burnt the entire night, preferably before midnight, but could be burnt the whole night. So the Rebbe said if you didn't do Chitas during the day, you could also finish it the night afterwards, or at least before Amud HaShachar, before the next morning. The Pnei Menachem, the Gerer Rebbe, asked a very interesting question, which many people have. His question was, the previous Rebbe set up the way the Tanya is meant to be studied during the year. And throughout the year, the Tanya is somewhat is different on a leap year and on a year when there is a regular, where there is no extra month. It's different, but a lot of it's the same. You would think if the purpose of changing around the order of the Tanya leap year is because since there are more days, so you shorten you should shorten all of the Tanya for every day, so that because you have a whole extra month. But instead, the majority of the year, the Chitas is the same on a leap year, on a regular year, and there's only certain days which are different. So he asked the Rebbe, asked the Rebbe, how come we do the same Tanya on a leap year for much of the leap year? So the Rebbe responded, it's similar to the Chumash. The Chumash is different on a leap year because it's a leap year, not necessarily because of trying to finish the Chumash at that certain time. Like case in point, for perhaps there's different answers for this question, but right now in Eretz Yisrael, they are reading Parshas Bahar, and we're not going to catch up to them until in 2 weeks. We read Bahar B'chokosei together, but really we could have caught up to them right after Pesach. We could have had Achrei Mos Kedoshim, a double parsha then, and caught up to Eretz Yisrael. But clearly, it's not about catching up, but rather there is a Chumash which is meant for every single day, wherever you are in the world, and therefore Eretz Yisrael has to do it this way, this day, and we have to do it a different way. We only catch up to them on that on Mitzvah Shem in 2 weeks. There was another line that the Rebbe Cashapp said after the story I mentioned before. The Rebbe Cashapp said that the study of a chapter of Tanya does not only break through all the concealments, but in the 50 years since the story of the Marash and Tzemach Tzedek, a chapter of Tanya is able not only to break through the concealments of godliness, but to bring about the deepest spiritual revelations, both spiritually and materially. And a chapter of Tanya by heart brings out a vast amount of blessing and success. One more point I wanted to share before. The Rebbe told Reb David Raskin, Olav Shalom, that the 10 minutes you spend studying Chitas affects your children and your grandchildren. Is it 10 minutes? Everyone spends a different amount of time studying it. Of course, you're supposed to put a lot of energy into doing it because it's an important thing. But if you can't, even saying the words of the Chitas are also a segula, also a spiritual remedy that brings lots of blessing. There was a boy who was traveling to New York from Israel, and people had asked him that he give the Rebbe a list of names to ask for blessing for various people. And the Rebbe, and the boy's writing the letter, and he was very tired, and he fell asleep in the middle of writing the letter. And so he came to New York, and the first thing he did was he handed the letter to the Rebbe's secretariat and got an answer back from the Rebbe. The answer was that he should study Chitas. He missed Chitas that day. He fell asleep without doing Chitas. Do Chitas. So it's clearly something that is far beyond our understanding, and but it's something that's pertinent and affects and has to do with everything that's going on in our life. So something worth investing. Someone actually wrote to the Rebbe and said to the Rebbe that they don't have time. They want to be exempt from Tilman Tanya and just do Chumash because they have time for Chumash, they don't have time for Tilman Tanya. Can they just fulfill their obligation just with Tilman Tanya? And the Rebbe responded, it's not for the sake of anyone else, it's for your sake, for your own benefit. Therefore, you want to do Tilman Tanya because it's for your own benefit. One unrelated story I wanted to share, not related to the stories before, is one more story. Rabbi Goldman from Yossi Goldman from South Africa, he related a story that's printed in the Kvar Chabad about a couple that had a question about adopting a child. They asked the Rebbe whether they should adopt a child or not. They were having a trouble becoming pregnant, and the Rebbe said the Rebbe gave them a blessing to have a child. But years were passing, and they, concurrent with trying to have a child medically, trying various treatments, they also tried to adopt a child. And they live in South Africa, and they had put in a request, and anyone who has tried to adopt a child before knows it's not a simple thing. It's quite a long time. And finally, they were given the green light to adopt a child which was going to be born soon. There was a woman who put up her child for adoption, but she was pregnant with the child, but she said that when she gives birth, she wants the child to be adopted. So they were on the waiting list for this child, or more accurately, they were going to get this child if they wanted the child, but they had to promise, they had to sign. And they asked Rabbi Goldman, what should we do? On the one hand, Rebbe gave us this blessing. On the other hand, it's taking time. And we're not exactly sure exactly what the Rebbe's blessing was. And time is, and there's not, but the good news is they told Rabbi Goldman, my wife is pregnant. And so maybe we shouldn't adopt. We want to be able to raise a child, but my wife is pregnant. So Rabbi Goldman said, it's not a question for a rabbi, it's a question for the Rebbe. Your wife is pregnant. We have to ask the Rebbe what you should do, because the issue was, although his wife was pregnant, This had happened before that she became pregnant, but she lost a child. She lost pregnancy. So she didn't know if they should try to carry for full term or they should adopt. And well, of course, they're going to try, but the question was, should they also adopt or not? So they asked the Rebbe, this was already after the stroke the Rebbe had on the 27th of Adar in Tafshin Bais in 1991, 92 rather. And the Rebbe at that time was only responding with a shake of his head. So the Rebbe responded, no, they should not adopt. Yes, they'll have a blessing for a child. And that's exactly what happened. Baruch Hashem, they have a child who, Baruch Hashem, is now, Baruch Hashem, an adult. Bottom line is that the words of the Rebbe are, as we learned in Pirkei Avos today, ethics of our fathers, and learned of tzaddik, words of tzaddik like fire. It's therefore, if he tells us that for blessings, for all good things, we should study Chitas, it's worth it, and it brings blessings in ways that we have no idea. And that's what I wanted to share tonight. Any questions, comments? Good vach, good chodesh, Yehuda.
Good chodesh. Thank you, Rabbi.
Good vach, good chodesh, Reb David. Good vach, good chodesh, Zelle. Good vach, good chodesh, Beryl. Good vach, good chodesh.
Good vach, good vach. Thank you very much.
Thank you.